But if I can kick things off by welcoming you all to this first webinar of the Bristol Trustee Group for 2021. I think I'm right in saying that. It's hosted by Bristol Law Society as before. I shouldn't say that this session is being recorded and the recording will be available after the session sometime later today, I understand. By way of introduction, I'm Peter Morris. I'm chairing today's session. I was managing partner of Burgess Sammer for 8 years, and I now chair the Bristol Legal Sector Community Engagement Group. This is a collaboration between legal professionals in the region and includes law firms, barristers' chambers, judges, cost firms, and law faculties from our universities. And our principal aim is to promote and support community engagement activities in the legal sector in the region. And the Bristol Trustee Group is a subgroup of the Community Engagement Group and also the Bristol Pro Bono Group. It's an initiative spawned by the COVID pandemic in response to the difficulties faced by many organisations in the voluntary sector since last March's lockdown, and in particular to support the trustees of those organisations and people thinking of becoming trustees who are having to make difficult decisions to ensure that their organisations not only survive, but also provide the services for which there is still an increasing demand. That group is chaired very ably by Jamie Cameron and Burgess Salmon, and this session has been organised by Caroline Bush of Osborne Clark, so thank you both. We're delighted to be joined by a very experienced panel of speakers with leading roles in community organisations. Got David Whitaker, who's Head of Services at VOSCA, Mark Porch, who's the Chief Executive of Alzheimer's-Brace, John Steenlet, who's Pro Bono Coordinator for City Funds, and Sandy Hicks, Head of the Charity Practice at Moon Executive Search. Thank you all very much indeed for agreeing to participate in this event. And the format will be 25 minutes or so of presentations from our speakers, followed by 30 minutes of Q&A from our panel. The aim is to be as interactive in that session as possible to answer your questions, and how you can ask a question is by using the chat button at the bottom of your screen. We'll try and keep an eye out for those. So please, as soon as you've got a question, start emailing it to us and we'll try and pick it up. So without more ado, can I just ask David to start us off by setting the scene, giving us an overview of the current demand for trustees, how organisations benefit from skilled trustees, and other such matters. So David, over to you.
Thanks, Peter. That's great. So I've got a couple of slides, so I'll just share those and then give you something else to look at that's not me. There we go. So yeah, I'm David Whitaker from VOSCA, and VOSCA does a lot of work, as you may or may not know, supporting charities and social enterprises with a focus on governance and leadership. There we go. So thinking about the demand for trustees at the moment, it was already high before COVID, and we've seen that organisations working through the change that the pandemic has required of them has increased that demand further in terms of strategic planning and decision making. The particular skills that we hear organisations are really looking for are, no surprises here, I guess, finance, HR for various reasons, strategic planning, income generation, as it always was, IT, not just Zoom, but other aspects of IT and remote working, and legal in various different guises. I could go on, but I won't for now. I had a quick look at just at the VOSCA website the other day, and there was 20 odd adverts for organisations specifically looking for trustees, and that's just one of the places that people can recruit, but it's not the only one. I think many boards do fantastic work, but I can't think of one organisation that I've spoken to that isn't looking for additional board capacity. in the past, I provided external supervision to a CEO, for example. I've also worked with an organisation where the board was really developing and kind of turning over from people that have been there for a long time and people that were coming in with new energy and ideas. You know, and it's great to see that going on locally. And I think, yeah, changes has kind of been forced on charities recently, reconfiguring business models, adapting their delivery methods to remote or other ways of working, designing new services, collaborations, mergers are happening a lot more at the moment, hence the legal requirements, and organisations just surviving. And all this really means that the leadership and the decision making for charities, the requirements have seen a big increase. So how do organisations benefit from the kind of expertise that boards can bring? I think critical friend is something that we often talk about, particularly for the chair or the board and the CEO relationship. And that's really about asking the right questions at the right time to support leadership and accountability. Practical skills, obviously, some of the areas of work that I just mentioned. Although there's that split between, you know, the strategic elements of working for an organisation and the operational elements, bringing practical skills to help with that is something that trustees really add to organisations working on the ground. I was going to say we're working with one charity at the moment that's negotiating a partnership agreement, for example, with some big institutions and some very small local charities. And it doesn't have expertise in-house, legal expertise in-house. So in this particular case, we have helped to organise a collaboration specialist to work with them, along with a pro bono solicitor, because they haven't got those skills in-house, and we're bringing them together just to work on this particular project. So that's a really good example of how different sectors are working to support governance in the city. I think new opportunities and networks, trustees can really help open doors, and that we often think about that within a framework of kind of equity and inclusion. And as I mentioned as well, there are trustees bring new ways of thinking and doing. You know, charities and social enterprises have seen particularly weaknesses or areas for improvement in recent months around IT and data, diversity and inclusion, where the private sector is often really forward thinking, marketing and promotion, particularly around social enterprise and trading activities, and kind of product and service development when we're thinking about investment. What kind of expertise do organisations tend to look for? I've mentioned some of these already. HR and employment is always in demand. Contracting and collaboration is something that we particularly help organisations with. My colleague who was head of partnerships was with you at the last session. Inclusion I've mentioned. I think, again, the values of charities are often around equity and inclusion, but how that translates into working policies and procedures, we can often learn a lot from the private sector, for example. Merger and consolidation, you've probably seen at the moment, lots of organisations, particularly after the pandemic, are looking to join together, to join forces, to make them stronger and deliver better services. Safeguarding is always an issue. Intellectual property, that the contracts I mentioned a minute ago that we were helping to negotiate. I've got quite a lot of intellectual property issues to sort out, and data security is always something that around IT, you know, it's really been thrown into focus with the increase in remote working just recently. So they're all areas that charities can really do with additional help on. And how does VOSCA help organisations, trustees and potential trustees work with local charities effectively? Well, we offer a range of governance and leadership training. Some of the courses that we run on a regular basis, I've mentioned there. We also run bespoke training, both for charities and social enterprises themselves, but also for people working with them, particularly around board audit and development, and briefings about how charities and social enterprises work for people who are new to the sector. And we also facilitate a range of peer learning, networking and support opportunities, a bit like this really, targeted to different areas of the sector, whether that could be children and young people or health and social care, or people working with assets and investment, for example. And that's about bringing people together to really share their expertise and learn from each other. So they're the kind of resources that this network can draw on from VOSCA to help people become trustees for the first time, or to develop once they're part of a charity board, and to help in their role with charities and social enterprises. Okay, that's my introduction. I'll stop sharing. Hopefully that made a little bit of sense.
Thanks,
I'll hand back to you, Peter.
Yeah, thanks, David. That's very useful. I've already got a couple of questions anyway for you, but I'll save them to the end. Can we then turn to Mark? Mark's going to tell us something about the role trustees play in his community organisation in particular, from his perspective as a chief executive of a very well-known organisation within our community. So Mark, can I hand over to you?
Thank you very much, Peter, and good afternoon, everyone. I want to talk to you about how the coronavirus has affected the charity sector as a whole. And it would be obvious that the pandemic has had a major effect on charities, but perhaps less easy to guess how each charity would have been affected, given the how diverse charities are. I organise a network of charity CEOs in and around Bristol, about 60 in number at the moment, and I asked them how they've been affected so I could give you examples. And if I name some of the charities concerned, I have got their permission to do so, just in case you're worried. For most of us, a sharp drop in income has been the most obvious impact. Those of us who rely on community activity, challenge events and social fundraising have had to cancel almost everything. And public fearfulness about the future, COVID and the effects of Brexit makes people more inclined to hang on to their money. Some charities have found themselves caught between increasing demand for their services and reduced income. St Peter's Hospice is an example of this. Their chief executive told me that their clinical teams have faced extraordinary demands in providing continuous palliative and end-of-life services. And this has been relentless with no apparent end in sight. And somehow they've managed to sustain their service. But at the same time, they've had to close their shops and postpone or cancel fundraising events. In other words, a classic squeeze, more demand, less money to pay for it. My own charity, Brace, supports medical research into dementia and is therefore not in increased demand, not in the COVID front line. In fact, labs closed and most research stopped for months. We have struggled to be heard because we are long-term and not of the moment. And while everybody worries about COVID, medical research of all kinds, apart from COVID vaccines, has been set back, and unknown numbers of people will suffer the consequences in years to come. The impact on beneficiaries is seen in manifold ways. Action for ME reports that half of the inquiries they received in January were pandemic related, how vaccines might affect people with ME, for example. A local community charity reports a 6 to 7-fold increase in mental health referrals. 125, which helps sex workers, reports that some of its beneficiaries have slipped back into drug misuse and abusive relationships. On the other hand, imagine being a charity that has a care home to run at the moment, trying to keep the virus out. There are at least 3 in our network that have care homes. One of them told me that the crisis had forced them to close their doors, which is a hardship for residents and their relatives, of course. But it also means saying no to new admissions, and that entails a loss of income with a knock-on effect on service. Even some NHS-related charities, despite Captain Tom and everything else, have their problems. Some NHS charities might be awash with funds as a result of the public response to COVID. But one in our network is worried about cancelled fundraising and the struggle to compete online with bigger charities. And that online competition is a huge problem for all of us, those of us who don't have the huge budgets of the national charities. It hasn't all been negative though. The Chief Executive of Brain Tumour Support, despite experiencing many setbacks, as we all have, has helpfully highlighted the positives, which are mainly in terms of finding new ways of working and discovering that some relationships are actually strengthened by the more frequent meetings made possible by Zoom. And I have to say that's been my experience at Brace too. Turning to the role of trustees, this has been absolutely crucial in this crisis. I have been hugely grateful to my own trustees for standing up when it mattered. They've responded quickly and they've really cared about the staff. A charity addressing social exclusion and another medical research charity have both spoken to me about how good their trustees have been, and I think that generally has been the experience of most of the charities that I have contact with in our network. For trustees, the crisis isn't just about the obvious financial, HR and service implications that need their attention. For example, since I'm talking to an audience of lawyers, we've all been switching to Zoom for our meetings, but are we allowed to by our governing documents? Thank heavens, Brace created a supplemental deed 7 years ago that made provision for urgent matters to be dealt with by email. The wording allowed generally for electronic means, which is, I think, an example of a good lawyer giving their clients necessary wriggle room down the line. Finally, anyone here who is a private client solicitor will know about the horrendous probate backlog. This I understand to be exacerbated by COVID, though not primarily caused by it. Many charities benefit from legacies, and with other income cut off, legacies become all the more important to many of us. It is therefore entirely possible that administrative delay could come to be of existential significance for some charities. If I've painted a grim picture, it's not without its positives. We are seeing imagination, generosity, flexibility, and sheer doggedness, with trustees, staff and supporters all playing their part. So thank you for listening and for whatever you personally are doing to help one or more charities weather this storm. Thank you.
Mark, thanks very much indeed. Lots of interesting stuff there, which we could, I'm sure, spend the rest of this hour chatting about some of them. But we will move on and come back to some towards the end, if we may. John, you're going to talk to us about the links here between trustees and pro bono.
Yes, thanks, Peter. So I coordinate the Bristol City Fund's pro bono brokerage. In essence, I work with partners in the city, not legal partners, that is, but such as VOSCA, and I work for Quartet Community Foundation. And I connect businesses, institutions, individuals, and other networks and brokerages with Bristol's voluntary sector to share professional skills in large and resources around skills-based volunteering. I thought I could share a few examples to illustrate some of the many ways and flexible ways that businesses and employees, individuals, yourselves, can support voluntary organisations and really make a difference. And just say that Quartet, Bristol University, Black South Network, and the Good Faith Partnership have been carrying out some research over the last year with the voluntary sector about the impact of COVID, but also looking to how funders and organisations can prioritise to recover well over the next 12 months. And a lot of what Mark has just said, you know, just really reaffirms what's been coming out through the research, especially the challenges with increased mental health issues and the strain on resources. Digital exclusion has always been a massive issue, but COVID has kind of provided the sort of circumstances to understand the scale of it a bit more, with the issues, you know, access to information, which has become very apparent. And there's a lot of anxiety and concern about the job market for people from across society, and it's becoming even harder for people to enter the job market. But some of the funding areas, priority areas we're looking at is about funding streams, and funders need to make provision for core costs, and more so for the voluntary sector. And the voluntary sector is keen to, you know, build those partnerships and collaborations between themselves within the sector, but also with businesses, because there's great value to be shared across between businesses and voluntary organisations. And there's a lot of work needed around reviewing processes to adapt services. And a lot of organisations have been so creative in adapting over the last 12 months. And a big thing that organisations are telling us is about providing support for their own staff's mental well-being, as well as to the people that they work to support. In addition to the legal support, which David ran through, that makes such a huge difference, the legal support. And as you can imagine, it directs, it helps organisations not to sort of redirect funding from frontline services, and it can make a huge difference. But there are, I sometimes say that the ways that businesses can support are as broad and creative as our imaginations can take us. Within businesses, they do a range of things, have a range of skills, have a range of departments, and each can play a part. So, for example, at the moment, a HR advisor is reviewing the policies for a charity that have created all of their organisation policies around recruitment, safeguarding, GDPR, but they're not actually sure if they're fit for purpose. And so in a flexible way, without having to visit the premises, you know, a HR professional just gets access to those documents and can review those in their own time, and then sort of communicate over the internet and Zoom with an individual. Also got HR people advising charities around sensitive personnel issues. And there's one of the demands that keeps coming through is for sort of very basic, I say basic, but the sort of beginners budgeting for some organizations, just to understand whether they're managing their sort of finances on a day-to-day basis in a good way, and training in using accountancy software. There's other ways that people can support by simply being an independent person, to provide facilitation for a staff team or for trustees to help them just tease out an issue, develop a strategy, and just be that kind of independent person using their skills of being able to communicate and get the best out of conversations and meetings. That's another way, for example, to support. And also being able to carry out research for an organization, whether that's market research or if they need to get up to speed on a subject but don't necessarily have the time to do that. That's something if people wanted to invest a few hours here and there to research a subject. But, you know, organizations can benefit from a whole range of support. In addition to, say, other impactful ways that you wouldn't classify as skills-based volunteering, there are many opportunities to be a mentor for young people in schools, to provide ESOL conversations for speakers of other languages. You can join a Zoom call for an hour a month, for example. Being a finance helper for Access Sport, for example, helping them to manage finances on some of their clubs. And also, it gets as novel as looking, Groundwork South and Bristol Friends of Parks are looking for a park Instagrammer. So if anyone was, interested in doing that. No, but I think this is something that David Allmark mentioned. Another way I think that you can make a huge difference is thinking about your own professional networks and friends, and thinking about some of the jobs that they do and the interests that they may have, and seeing if they want to have a conversation with anyone at VOSCUR or myself, for example, about how they might be able to find out about what local opportunities there are, and how they might be able to get involved. But as everyone will imagine, you can pick up a lot of skills outside of your own work environment, and often a fantastic, can be a fantastic way to develop leadership skills, because in some roles, and as a trustee as well, you're outside of a work environment and there isn't positional authority per se. So it's learning how to lead and guide without having that positional authority. But they are some of the examples, and I'm here, if anybody wants to have a conversation at a later date about, what's out there, I'd be very happy to do so. Okay, thanks, Peter.
Thanks, John. Of course, you're well into the role now. How long have you been doing it? You may have mentioned it.
Still over 5 months now.
5 months, yeah.
We've been delivering the brokerage.
Yeah. Getting to understand what's going on in our city.
Yes.
Actually, before I just introduce Sandy, can I just mention, I said at the beginning, put your questions on chat, which was silly of me. I should have said Q&A. So do think about any questions you've got. We've got a few at the moment, but please keep them coming in using the Q&A. Sandy, can I hand over to you at this point? You're going to speak to us from the perspective of a recruiter about how.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so thanks for letting me attend this training session and asking me back, which is nice. So just as a quick introduction, I'm Sandy Hinks and I work at the charity practice at Moon Executive Search. We're based in Bristol. And I work with lots of different sized charities, newly formed charities, as well as, well-established charities. So I'm here to talk to you today about what should be an expression of interest and just some CV tips just to help you. So we'll start with the expression of interest. So this is a document that goes alongside your CV and is generally asked when applying for trustee work. So it's in the form of a letter, which obviously can be emailed, and you write it, "Dear Chair of the Board," or if you're writing to somebody like me, it's "Dear Sandy." So it's a formal document. Your next paragraph should be just to briefly introduce yourself and tell the reader which role you're interested in. Again, if we've got more than one role, make sure that you put down which role that you're interested in. And then the next paragraph, I think, should be really personal to you. And it's, why do you want to apply for this role? And why this charity? And as somebody that reads lots of expressions of interest, I love the ones that you can get a feel for that person after you've read it. And you've never met them, you've never spoken to them, and you can really tell the ones that, I don't know, that really do want to be part of a charity. You get some real good warmth feelings. And that's really lovely, because obviously for me as a recruiter, I want people that are passionate and driven about becoming and joining that charity, rather than people that just want to stick it on the CV to make it look good. So that would be the first sort of big paragraph. The next bit then is explain your work history briefly, because that will obviously be in your CV, but just give them an example for, you know, what you are. So for me, if I was doing it, I would put down that I've worked in recruitment industry for 30 years. I've worked for a national recruiter, and I've specialised in charity, finance and IT. So I'm just telling the reader a little bit about, you know, who I am. And then I would just put a few bullet points. So again, looking at what they're asking for, if there's a particular skill set, make sure you bullet point those skills, that way I can bring value to that board. And then you finish it off with, you know, please contact me on my mobile number and email. So try and keep it to a page if you can, because when you start going into 2 or 3 pages, it's quite long, especially when you've got lots of CVs and expressions of interest in front of you. So that would be my sort of tips on the expression of interest. Now, regards to your CV, again, it's amazing how many people send CVs in without any contact details on. So make sure you put your email address on and your phone number, your mobile number. And again, make sure your emails are professional sounding, you know, no joke emails, because at the moment, when I'm arranging interviews, everything's being done on Zoom. So I have to share your email address with the charity. And again, we have had a recent one which was on Zoom, that the name, make sure your name is professional. We had somebody who was a senior partner of a law firm. Thankfully, it was with us, within Moon, that his name had been changed to something very rude. I won't tell you what the word was, and he didn't realise. And we did say to him that, you know, do you realise this is showing on your Zoom call? And he was mortified. So again, just check little things like that. Just do some checks, basic checks. The next part of your CV should be a personal profile. So that's a summary of how your skill set and your experience, and, you know, why you're the best person for this job. So use descriptive language to give the reader a sense of your character and your traits. And again, you know, I know that this isn't a paid role, but if you were looking for a paid role, put down that why are you seeking this role and what you're looking for your next career move. So for me, just an example, I would put up something like, I head up the charity practice at Moon. I've been with them since 2016. I've got 30 years experience working in recruitment and consultancy. You know, I've successfully grown the charity practice over the last few years, and I work nationally and locally with major charities, not-for-profit and voluntary groups, and I recruit both at C-suite, trustee, chair, company secretary and treasurer roles. So that's given the reader a bit of a feel that, you know, I don't just work in Bristol, I work outside. And I'm not just doing trustees, I'm doing other senior roles within the charity sector. And again, I would put something down like, you know, I've worked in the past within finance, a national IT recruiter and a boutique recruitment. So again, it's giving the reader a bit of a feel for who I am. And you can finish it off that obviously you're qualified. So again, I would do that with mine. The next bit would be your career summary. And that should be laid out in chronological order. So start with your most recent role. Bullet points are an excellent way to be concise, and be sure not to repeat yourself in different jobs. Once is enough. General rule is to focus on your relevant experience for each application, and measuring information is a good way of demonstrating your value that you can add. So your CV should be laid out clearly with what you do and where you work. And again, expect questions if you've moved roles, you know, why have you moved roles? If you've got gaps in your CV, again, be expected to be questioned, and be honest and, you know, tell the truth why there's a gap in your CV. And again, I said bullet points. So, I mean, I have looked at a few legal people's CVs that I've dealt with, and they like Roman numerals, but it looks a bit old-fashioned. So I would stick with bullet points if I were you. Hobbies, interesting one. Again, put that at the end of your CV. Some employers like to ask about you and what you do outside your working life. Again, try and make your hobbies something that doesn't distract from your skill set too much and becoming the main point or talk when we're applying for these roles. So a couple stick to mind. I remember reading somebody that had chopping wood as a hobby, eating cheese and crackers, and breeding lop-eared rabbits. So they just clearly stick in my mind. But again, just be careful what you do put down. Proofreading, get somebody to proofread your CV and your expression of interest. It's very, very easy with predictive text and obviously spell check now to get the wrong word put in. So get somebody to check what you've done, and your length of your CV as well. If you can, try to keep it 2 to 3 pages. You know, try not to go beyond that, because again, you're trying to get the key information out to that person that's looking at CVs straight away. So, you know, remember, when people get a CV land on their desk, they tend to skim read it first, and they're looking for those key words. So again, if you've got those bullet points, push those key skills up to the top so the reader sees them first. Hit them with what they're asking for. So again, like I say, try and keep it to 3 pages. Again, I did get this chap a job in the end, but he sent me his CV originally, and it was like 6 pages of paragraphs. And by sort of page 1, I was losing the will to carry on a bit, because it was so detailed. So again, try and keep it short, sharp and brief. And the other thing to remember is have different CVs. You know, have a CV for maybe your paid work, have a CV for when you're doing trustee work, but tailor your CV to that trustee role. So if they're asking for a particular skill, and you've got it, make sure it's on your CV. So that's me, really. Hopefully found that helpful.
Thanks, Sandy. I'm interested to hear all that, actually, because it's because people assume because they're giving it their time for free, and people should be very grateful. And actually, they can be quite, for obvious reasons, robust processes, can't they? Rightly so. Sorry, you're on mute.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, that's right. But it's like, you know, when I'm talking to people, they tell me things in conversation, and I think, well, that wasn't even on your CV. So yeah, like I say, it's important, like you say, you get as much information as you can on the documents, but not bore everybody to death either.
Thanks very much indeed, Sandy, and thanks to all our speakers. It's now your turn, participants, to ask questions. We've got a few. The first question asked was Natalie, how has COVID changed the process of bringing trustees on board? And David has very kindly answered that one within the Q&A. I mean, the gist of it seems to be, I don't think COVID has changed the process of bringing trustees on board significantly. Induction is another matter. And you can understand that. David, I don't know if you want to add to that at all, or you're happy with that answer. David may not be listening to me. Yeah,
sorry, I was on mute. Yeah, I think, yeah, in some ways it's very similar, but I think that it's the kind of induction part that I think has changed, and that getting to know the rest of the team, I think, is probably the most important thing. And that, you know, organisations, we've known that set up extra sessions. So, you know, you can't just rely on going to a board meeting every month to actually get to know the team in a social way or in a richer way. And so I think it's been more around one-to-one sessions with trustees and staff, or trustees and managers, that's helped to get new members of a board up to speed. I think that's probably made the biggest difference. But as far as recruitment and advertising and the application process goes, I think that's probably stayed fairly similar.
So could I ask you, actually, and any of the other panelists who want to join in on this one, what does a good induction process look like?
For me as a recruiter, it's giving potential trustees all the information up front so that they can do their homework, they can do their research. So when we put our packs together, we're making sure everyone's got access to a set of accounts, the strategic plans, So if, like I say, that they hopefully will know everything they need to know before they even apply, to make sure that they're, making sure that they're attending, going for the right role. So, and then obviously the next step would be for the charity then, once they've got the role, to push them through a vigorous induction.
Thanks.
From our point at Brace, the lockdown has changed the way we recruit people, not in terms of being any less rigorous, but having to do everything on screen. We've recruited one new trustee. We haven't met him yet. He's been with us since August as a trustee and is playing his part. What we can't do with induction, because we can still supply the papers in electronic form or post them, we can still talk to them, still give them information. What we can't do is have that deeper level of engagement. When we get back to whatever normal is after this, we will be inviting them to come in and meet all the staff in the office and visit the some of the research facilities, especially those near our office at Southmead Hospital. It's a really important bit of visual education as much as anything else. They really absorb a lot about what we're doing, and I guess there is an equivalent for every charity. You can't just look at the website and talk to people and understand in depth. You actually need to come along and see the work firsthand and talk to those who are doing it.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. Moving on in terms of questions, Shahada, I do apologise if I'm not pronouncing your name correctly. You've asked a couple of questions, one of which David has answered, and he may be answering the other one as well. First was, what resource support groups can I rely on to help me on my development journey? If you wouldn't mind posting it in the chat, I'd be grateful. So, and that is posted by David, and the organisations are there. And David's obviously referred to VOSCA and what it provides, and also Charity Connect. And the second question, I'm afraid I haven't read it. David, you have. Do you want to summarise the question and what your answer to it would be? I think you were going to answer that one as well.
Yes. Is this about asking about preparing a constitution for an unincorporated association?
Yeah.
And whether there's a precedent constitution or a template constitution available. There certainly are, and I can share them. We've got some within VOSCA, and we work with a partner organisation called Westsport that specialises in sports organisations. So either, I'm sure we will have something, or they will between us. So I'll be happy to share them if someone wants to get in touch, certainly.
That's great. That's great. There's another one on the Q&A, but there's also a couple of questions which Caroline has posed. Caroline, do you want to ask your questions now?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you. I will go on to video as well. Oh, there I am. So thank you, speakers. I think that's been, from my perspective, personally, really very, very interesting. So that's great. Two questions popped into my mind, and I think these are kind of for personal interest, but also I think quite helpful generally, perhaps for people who are not trustees, but thinking of kind of dipping their toe in the water. So the first question is a general one, I guess, and that's, what would the panelists suggest in terms of first steps someone should take if they're interested in knowing more about being a trustee? Because I think for a lot of people it sounds quite interesting, and certainly if they find the right organisation, it's obviously, we've heard lots of the benefits, actually both to the trustee and to the organisation, that a trustee can bring. But I think, I guess from my perspective, and I'm not a trustee, full disclosure, it is something I'd be interested in doing, but I think I'd be very keen to find a suitable role, make sure I was finding a suitable organisation. And Sandy picked up on a couple of points that obviously it sounds like with her opportunities, there's quite a lot of information provided, and I think that sounds really helpful. And I think for me as well, for other lawyers on the call, we are busy people, so it's finding the right level of commitment. So that was the first question. And then the second one, which is linked actually, is John mentioned a couple of kind of one-off type support that you can offer. And I think maybe, as I say, a linked question, if someone is a little bit more time poor, how could those type of opportunities be found out about? Because that sounds really interesting. I'm sure I'm not the only one on the call who thought that was interesting. So throwing it over to you. Thank you.
I can say the Charity Commission website have got some good guidelines on what a trustee role is and what's expected. and they've got some leaflets you can download. So I would look on the Charity Commission website, would be one place to look.
I was going to say the opposite. I was going to say avoid the Charity Commission. If anything can put you off being a trustee, it's the Charity Commission. There's sort of lots of sort of waggy finger stuff. That's it. To be serious, once you've decided you want to be a trustee, there is important information there, and yes, you should look at it. I'm pretty sure the NCVO has some good stuff as well. But I would start with by looking at one or two charities, perhaps their websites, and then making direct contact, representing causes you really care about. Because if you're passionate about the cause or sympathetic with the cause, that's you're halfway there, and you'll find that each charity makes use of its trustees in very different ways. So you really need to get a feel about the different ways that trustees get involved. Some of them are up to their elbows in work, and some of them maybe just turn up for trustee meetings, and that's all that's required of them. So you need to find something of the depth that you personally want to find in a cause that you really care about.
Thanks, Mark. I just make an observation actually about just sort of occasional meetings and things like that. My sort of fairly limited and personal experience of any of these roles is that somebody gives me an indication of the time they think I'm likely to spend, and I probably double it and think that's going to be there or thereabouts.
Yeah, I always ask the charity that I work with, try and be realistic about the time that you envisage, because that is the first question everybody will ask, and it's only fair to really try and give people the opportunity at the very beginning to say yes or no if they've got the time. So yeah, there's never very often 4 meetings a year, is it?
And also I think that the reality is the more you get involved, the more you think you can offer something to the organisation, and hopefully the organisation thinks there's more they can get out of you. So these things can evolve, I think. It should be allowed to evolve. It's a natural part of it. Caroline, you had a second question.
Oh yeah, I was just going to say, Peter, if I may, I think it's really useful to get to know the charity a bit, if you can, and spend some time with them in the most practical way you can in the current circumstances, but also kind of, if you can, find out what the board is currently working on and what some of their current challenges are. I think the last thing anybody wants to do is sort of be full of enthusiasm and join a board and then suddenly find out that what they've kind of let themselves in for. So it's really good to sort of find out and if they've got any big issues going on and things like that. That's not to, I don't think that should put you off. I think that should help you make a better decision. But sorry, Peter, I think Caroline's second question was about being aware of sort of current opportunities.
Yeah.
Is that right? If I may just touch upon that, with the City Funds pro bono brokerage, I don't have a sophisticated system that anybody can have a look at in the city and see what opportunities there are, because we are growing the brokerage. It's at the moment a case of, if anybody is interested to have a conversation with me to indicate that they'd be interested in finding, what I do with some businesses is I will run opportunities past them for them to have a think about. And I can do that with individuals as well. There are still some quite a range of relevant opportunities, different, perhaps less skills sharing opportunities, but equally worthwhile. On the Can Do website, the Bristol Can Do website, there's still a number of opportunities on there. But as I say, I'd be delighted to have a conversation with anyone at any time.
Thank you, that's really helpful.
Thanks, Caroline. Thanks, panel. Just before we move on to another question, just to draw your attention to the fact that there's a number of these questions have been answered within the Q&A. And in particular, I'm just looking at one now about organisations similar to VOSCA that can help UK-wide charities rather than those limited to the Bristol area. And John and David have chipped in there with references to NCVO and to smallcharities.org.uk. So that looks like useful information there. In terms of other questions, back to the induction point, this is Shardo again, is saying, I haven't actually had a formal introduction. What are the key things I should be insisting on other than the governing document as part of my induction? Well, I think Sandy covered part of that, Mark covered part of that. But in terms of documentation, and as we've got lawyers, a lot of lawyers on this, this particular call, they like documents. So any other sort of core documents which you would say they should be asking about?
I'd suggest, well, it might be a good cure for insomnia, but policies and procedures are something that the board is responsible for, and I really think HR, the board are the employers, and I think you don't have to be a specialist in HR and the employment policies and procedures, but to really, that it's an area of responsibility I think that people would really benefit from, but particularly, not just around making sure that the nuts and bolts are correct, but thinking particularly, around inclusion and diversity, and our organisations really open to finding the, positioning themselves to work with a diverse and an exciting range of people. It's not just about filling the forms in, the HR side of things. I think that's really important for any board member to take close note of.
Thanks, David. Any others? I could think of one, definitely.
I was going to say the last set of accounts and trustees report for any charity. Beyond that, it probably depends on the nature of the charity and what you think your role within it is going to be. I mean, it might be their safeguarding policy, for example, or their policy on environmental protection. It just depends on what the charity is actually doing, as I say, and what the trustee role you're looking at is.
I'd certainly refer to the accounts and try and understand them. And if they're not easily understood, ask the treasurer or something, somebody else in the organisation to explain them to you. Do you expect people to ask about things like trustee insurance? Yeah, nods all round. So that's another one. So we've got governing documents, accounts, policies and procedures, particularly employment-related ones, and insurance. Anything else you would, if you were talking to a new trustee, you would say, well, I'd have a look at this if I were you. No, that's fine.
Well, I was going to say that the inspiration bit, I would have thought would come from a business plan or a strategy, and I think to see where an organisation wants to go and how it's going to get there. I mean I always find that quite exciting, and if that can tell a really good story that you want to be part of as a trustee, then that's why you follow your passion and see how you can play your part in that longer term story, I think.
Yeah.
You might get questions of the sort that we get, because we're a science-related charity. It's fairly typical for a trustee who isn't a scientist, new trustee or prospective trustee, that is, to say, how much do I need to understand the work? Because for those of us who are not scientists, and that includes me, top subjects like biochemistry are extremely difficult. So you depending again on the work of it, you might need to help the trustee define how much they are talking about the core work of the charity and how much they need to be able to talk about the governance of the charity and what their own role is, and whether their role is very public and therefore they might be questioned in depth.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. Yes, that's true. I haven't really talked about the ambassadorial side of being a trustee. I don't know if any of you want to pick up on that. No, that's all right. But I think it's, I think that's personally, I think it's quite an important part when you're talking about being able to talk about your charity or organisation sensibly, so knowing enough about it, but being prepared to evangelise for it, if that's the right word as well, out in the community, particularly when it comes.
I was going to say, I do work with cancer research in Bristol, and took me a while to get some of the words into my head. Epidemiology now is one that's always on the TV. And when I first started working with them, I didn't know what it meant. So yeah, so they're good actually. They've tried to sort of tell us about, but like what Mark said, their research in sort of a normal person's way of thinking rather than a scientific talk. So that when we go out, we can talk about the work that they're doing here in Bristol. So yeah.
Good. We're running out of time, but there's apart from there's a number of comments being made on the Q&A which you may wish to look at, and a question has just cropped up. Have panel members found that there is a risk that COVID restrictions and increased reliance on social media, e.g. WhatsApp, can mean that the line between operational and strategic can become blurred, and matters that are best discussed in a different medium or forum are aired too widely between trustees, staff and volunteers and others? Anybody?
I was going to say, I'm not sure that that's a kind of COVID necessarily specific thing, but I think very often that strategic operational blurring does go on very, very, very often, and it can cause lots of problems. And I think, yeah, I'm sure remote working and not seeing people face to face has probably exacerbated that a little bit. But I think it was one of those things again that COVID's probably shone a light on. And I think, yeah, I'm thinking of one organisation that I've been working with recently where those boundaries really have been causing a lot of friction. And so we're trying to help them sort that out and really get things back to how they should be.
Yeah, I've seen it in the context, indirectly, of COVID through Zoom, that with an attempt to be efficient, the organisations become inclusive to try and get more people involved in conversations, and then suddenly thinking, oh, well, actually, we need to row back a bit to get to our core governance team, because there are certain things we want to discuss within that team. So I think I've seen some blurring in that direction. I like to think we've perhaps we haven't answered all questions. I'm just checking. Yeah, I mean, various requests there for sharing emails so that there can be follow-up on this, which we will try and do. And there we are, we're bang on 2 o'clock, so I should bring this to an end. Thank you very much indeed for joining us today. Thank you particularly to all our speakers. It's really good to see you. And thanks again for all your insightful comments. Future sessions for Bristol Trustee Group will be about every 6 weeks. If you've got any suggestions as to topics that you'd like to hear about in particular, can you feed them either to me or to Caroline or indeed Claire at Bristol Law Society? Beyond that, thank you very much indeed again for joining us today, and thank you to Bristol Law Society for hosting us. Thanks very much.